Before the Rockefellers, before the Rothschilds, and long before today's tech billionaires, one family of weavers rose from obscurity to control the world's most powerful empires. They were the Fuggers, and at their height, they amassed a fortune that's almost impossible to comprehend today. It's estimated to be the equivalent of over $400 billion, allowing them to control nearly 2% of Europe's entire economy. They bankrolled kings, defied popes, and built a financial dynasty that looked like it would last forever. But a series of disastrous decisions and incredibly risky deals would bring their empire crashing down. This is the story of how the Fugger family bought the world and how they lost it. The Fugger dynasty doesn't begin in a palace or a bank, but in a simple weaver's cottage. In 1367, a master weaver named Hans Fugger decided to leave his rural village and move to the booming city of Augsburg. That year, the city's tax register made a simple, almost prophetic note. Fucker Advenant! Fugger has arrived. Hans was an ambitious man. Through two clever marriages, both to daughters of guildmasters, he cemented his place in Augsburg's strict social structure. He didn't just weave fustian, a popular cotton-linen blend. He started organizing its distribution, acting as a middleman. This was the family's first real step away from just making things and toward the world of commerce. By the time he died around 1408, Hans had built a solid foundation, leaving behind a thriving business. His sons, Andreas and Jakob, at first continued the business together, but soon enough their paths split, dividing the family into two lines, the Fuggers of the Doe and the Fuggers of the Lily, named for their coats of arms. The Doe branch, led by the risk-taking Andreas, had a quick flash of success followed by a spectacular bankruptcy in 1499 that practically erased them from Augsburg's elite. The family's future would instead fall to the line of Jakob Fugger the Elder. Maybe learning from his brother's failure, Jakob was cautious and methodical, steadily expanding the family's interests. He moved the family out of the Weavers' Guild and into the more respected Merchants' Guild, a huge step up the social and economic ladder. When Jakob the Elder died in 1469, the family was already one of the wealthiest in Augsburg. He left the growing business in the very capable hands of his widow, Barbara, and their three most ambitious sons, Ulrich, Georg, and Jakob. It was this trio that would turn a respectable family business into a global empire. After Jakob the Elder's death, a new energy took over the Fugger enterprise. His widow, Barbara Bossinger, was the daughter of a mint master and had a sharp financial mind of her own, managing the business until her sons were ready. The three brothers, Ulrich, Georg, and the youngest and most brilliant Jakob, were a powerhouse team. Ulrich was the negotiator, Georg was the reliable workhorse, and Jakob, sent to Venice as a teen to learn his trade, was the visionary. Venice was the center of the world's trade, a living classroom where a young man could learn the complex machinery of banking, currency exchange, and global finance. Jakob soaked it all in, and when he returned to Augsburg, he wasn't just a merchant anymore. He was a financier with a revolutionary understanding of money. The big moment came in 1494. The Medici Bank in Florence, which had dominated European finance for a century, was in a steep decline. Seizing the opportunity, Ulrich, Georg, and Jakob formalized their partnership, creating their first public company. This wasn't just a family workshop anymore, it was a structured corporation. They solidified their partnership with something they called the Basic Law of Fugger Trade. This internal charter was a stroke of genius, a formal agreement that laid out clear rules for decision-making, profit sharing, and most importantly, preventing the brothers from competing with each other. It ensured family unity and pointed all their ambition in one direction. This formal structure made them different. While other merchant families were tearing themselves apart with internal fights, the Fuggers operated like a disciplined army. They also forged powerful alliances through marriage, with all three brothers marrying into Augsburg's most powerful families, bringing in social status and, crucially, more capital for the company. With this solid base, they started to branch out. The textile trade that had been their foundation became just one piece of a much larger puzzle. They started handling financial services for the papal court, a very profitable and influential gig. but their biggest move was just around the corner into an industry that would give them leverage over the most powerful people in Europe: mining. As the 16th century began, the Fugger Company was dominated by the incredible ambition of one man, Jakob Fugger, who would soon be known as Jacob the Rich. He was the mastermind who would take the family's already large fortune and multiply it beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Jacob's genius was his ability to see how different industries connected. He knew that controlling the raw materials of an industrializing Europe was the key to unlocking immense power. His first big move was a calculated risk that became his signature play. In the late 1480s, he made a loan to Archduke Sigismund of Tyrol, a member of the powerful Habsburg family. Sigismund was always broke, thanks to his fancy lifestyle and expensive castles. Jakob gave him the money, but not for simple interest. Instead, he secured the rights to the Archduke's silver mines in Tyrol. This was a game changer. Instead of just being a lender, Jakob became a partner in the mine's profits. He then used this model again and again. The family expanded into copper and silver mining across Austria and Hungary. Soon, the Fuggers didn't just trade copper. They had a near monopoly on its production and sale across the continent. Hungarian copper was shipped through their office in Antwerp, and from there to Lisbon, where it was loaded onto Portuguese ships heading for India. The Fuggers were at the heart of a truly global supply chain, but Jakob knew that metal and money were only two parts of his empire. The third, and maybe the most important, was information. In an age when news traveled only as fast as a horse, Jakob built an incredible private intelligence network. His agents in major cities like Venice, Rome, and Lisbon weren't just there to do business. They were ordered to gather and send back newsletters detailing political drama, military movements, and market changes. This network gave Jakob an almost psychic advantage, letting him see political crises, market crashes, and investment opportunities long before his rivals. He always knew who needed money, who was about to start a war, and whose luck was about to run out. This powerful mix of mining, banking, and intelligence let him climb to the very top. His relationship with the Habsburgs grew stronger, especially with the ambitious Maximilian III, who became Holy Roman Emperor. The Fuggers became his main bankers, funding everything from his wars to the strategic marriages that would secure Spain, Bohemia, and Hungary for the Habsburg dynasty. The family from Augsburg wasn't just a group of merchants anymore. They were the bankers to Europe's elite, the silent partners behind thrones and armies. Jakob Fugger had built a machine that turned wealth into power, and power back into even more wealth. By 1519, Jakob Fugger was so powerful that he could treat the election of the most important ruler in the Christian world like a business deal. The moment that cemented his legend came when Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian III died. Maximilian, a man whose ambitions were always bigger than his bank account, died owing the Fugger firm a massive amount of money. The future of that loan, and the entire Fugger-Habsburg relationship, depended on who came next. The race came down to two men, King Francis IV of France and King Charles Orange of Spain, Maximilian's own grandson. Francis was a direct threat to Habsburg power, and if he won, it would have been a financial disaster for Jakob. The Fugger loans to the Habsburgs would probably become worthless. Charles, on the other hand, was the safe bet. For Jakob, his election wasn't just a preference, it was a financial necessity. But the Holy Roman Emperor wasn't chosen by a popular vote. He was selected by 7 prince-electors, powerful German nobles who fully expected to be paid for their trouble. The election turned into a full-blown auction for the imperial crown. Francis I showed up with a war chest of 300,000 guilders, ready to buy his way into power. Charles, despite his huge territories, was short on cash. So he turned to the only man in Europe who could single-handedly outbid a king, Jakob Fugger. What happened next was one of the boldest financial power plays in history. The total price tag to secure the election was a stunning 885 gold florins. Of that amount, Jakob Fugger personally raised and loaned an incredible $543,000, more than 60% of the total. While other banks like the Welsers chipped in, It was Fugger's money that sealed the deal. He transferred the massive sums to the prince-electors, guaranteeing their votes. On June 28, 1519, Charles of Spain was unanimously elected Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He literally owed his crown to his banker, and Jakob Fugger never let him forget it. In a famously bold letter a few years later, Jakob bluntly reminded the most powerful man in the world, "It is well known and clear as day that your imperial majesty would not have been able to gain the Roman crown without my help." This was the absolute peak of Fugger power. Their wealth had been fully weaponized. By financing the emperor, Jakob didn't just protect his old investments, he guaranteed a fire hose of future profits. The Fuggers were granted valuable leases on Spanish estates and the rights to hugely profitable mercury mines in Almaden, which were essential for refining silver. Their client list was a who's who of European royalty, including King Henry VIII of England. The Fugger firm had become a shadow government, a financial superpower whose influence stretched from the mines of Peru to the papal court in Rome. For all practical purposes, the weaver's descendants from Augsburg now owned Europe. When he died in 1525, Jakob Fugger the Rich had built a personal fortune so large it's hard to wrap your head around. It's estimated his net worth was somewhere between 400 and 450 billion in today's dollars. This single fortune represented roughly 2% of Europe's entire economic output at the time, a level of relative wealth no modern billionaire has ever even approached. The Fugger Company's assets totaled over 2 million guilders, a number that had doubled in just over a decade. Jakob, who had no children, left this massive empire to his nephew, Anton Fugger. Anton was a gifted businessman himself, and under his leadership, the firm's assets kept growing, reaching their all-time high in 1546. Anton expanded the family's trade into the New World, with ventures in Peru and Chile, and opened new mines in Sweden and Norway. For a while, it looked like the Fugger dynasty was unstoppable. But under the glittering surface, the empire's foundations were becoming incredibly fragile. The very strategy that had made the Fuggers so powerful, their deep ties to the House of Habsburg, was slowly becoming their greatest weakness. The company's portfolio, once a smart mix of trade, commodities, and banking, was now almost entirely tied up in one high-risk asset: loans to royalty. They weren't just bankers to kings anymore. They were the main creditors of an empire that was constantly fighting ruinously expensive wars. The Fuggers were caught in a trap of their own making. They had lent so much money to Emperor Charles V and his son, Philip II of Spain, that they couldn't afford to let them fail. Every new war required new loans just to protect the old ones. It was the 16th century version of throwing good money after bad. They were forced to extend more and more credit, often without the solid collateral, like mining rights, that had been Jakob's signature. The loans became permanent, debts that were endlessly rolled over with little hope of ever being paid back in full. Anton Fugger saw the danger. As early as 1549, he wrote about wanting to dissolve the firm, sick of the growing risk posed by his royal clients. In his will, he even told his sons to get out of the high-stakes banking game. The problem was they were in too deep. The health of their entire financial kingdom was now tied to the solvency of a single client, the Spanish crown, and the Spanish crown was spending money it didn't have. The Fuggers' once diversified business had become a precarious house of cards, built on the assumption that a king always pays his debts. That assumption was about to be brutally tested. The moment the Fuggers had been dreading finally arrived in 1557. King Philip II of Spain, drowning in debt inherited from his father and fighting his own expensive wars, did the unthinkable. He declared a state bankruptcy. Spain suspended all payments on its debts, sending a shockwave through the entire financial system of Europe. For the Fugger family, it was a cataclysm. They were, by a huge margin, Spain's biggest creditors. The default didn't just stop interest payments, it made a massive chunk of their assets illiquid and potentially worthless overnight. The impact was immediate and devastating. The firm that had once given orders to emperors was now at the mercy of a bankrupt king. The Spanish default of 1557 was just the first of several that would hammer the Habsburg Empire and the Fugger fortune over the next few decades. Philip II couldn't let his biggest bankers go completely bust because he knew he'd need to borrow from them again. In a move that showed both the Fuggers' lingering importance and their new weakness, Philip partially exempted them from the full bankruptcy. They were allowed to restructure their debt, swapping some of it for long-term government bonds called juros, essentially IOUs backed by future taxes. But this was a creditor's nightmare. They were trading bad debt for the promise of uncertain payments from a government that had already proven it couldn't be trusted. The cash that was the lifeblood of their business was gone, replaced by paper. The power dynamic had completely flipped. The money the Fuggers had lent to Spain wasn't all theirs. They had borrowed some of it from other sources. The Spanish crisis sent tremors through these markets, damaging the Fuggers' own credit and reputation. While the family firm survived the initial shock, it was a wound they would never recover from. The year 1557 marks the clear turning point in their story, the moment the incredible rise gave way to a slow, painful decline. The crisis exposed the fatal flaw in Jacob the Rich's grand plan. He had tied the family's destiny to kings, and now they were being dragged down by the very system they had built. While Spain's defaults were the external shocks that cracked the empire, internal problems were rotting it from the inside. The decline was accelerated by an issue that hits many family dynasties: a failure of succession. Jacob the Rich was a one-of-a-kind genius. He died childless in 1525, passing control to his nephew Anton. Anton Fugger was a brilliant businessman who not only preserved but actually doubled the family's fortune. But even he saw the writing on the wall, recognizing the huge risks of being so exposed to royal debt. The real trouble started with the next generation. Anton's sons and nephews were born into a world of unimaginable wealth. They never had to fight for it. They were princes of commerce, not hungry merchants. The vision and relentless drive of their ancestors were gone. One nephew, Heinz Jacob, was a famous art collector but a terrible businessman whose personal financial problems got so bad he was forced out of the family firm. The strict basic law that had once been the Fuggers' strength started to fall apart. Designed for a small group of brothers, it couldn't manage a huge multinational corporation. Family arguments and competing interests replaced the unity that had made them so powerful. Faced with mounting losses from banking, the family made a huge strategic shift. Led by Anton's son, Marcus, they began a deliberate retreat from high finance. Instead of pouring money into risky loans, they started buying up land. They acquired huge estates and aristocratic titles, becoming the lords of places like Kirchberg and Weissenhorn. This was a conscious decision to trade their volatile business wealth for the stable, aristocratic security of land ownership. They were trying to become nobles, not bankers. The logic was simple. A king can default on a loan, but he can't take away your hereditary title or your farmland. The Fuggers were no longer trying to gain while they can. They were just trying to hold on to what they had. This marked the end of an era. The days of financing emperors were over. The Fuggers were stepping back from the world stage, seeking safety in land. It was a strategy to preserve the family's fortune. But they were about to find out that in a continent about to be torn apart by war, nothing was truly safe. By the early 1600s, the Fugger Trading Company was just a shadow of its former self. While the family remained incredibly wealthy landowners, their time as Europe's top bankers was long gone. The final crushing blow wouldn't come from a ledger book, but from the pure chaos of total war. In 1618, Central Europe exploded into the devastating conflict known as the 30 Years' War. This wasn't a tidy war fought on distant battlefields. It was a brutal, sprawling nightmare that destroyed entire regions. Armies lived off the land, plundering everything in their path. The Fuggers' new strategy of landed security was completely useless against this kind of mayhem. Their estates, mostly in Swabia, were directly in the path of marching armies. What good is a title when soldiers are burning your villages? The very assets they had chosen for their safety became targets. The war shattered Germany's economy. The Fuggers' remaining business interests evaporated. Their old debtor, the Spanish crown, defaulted again in 1607. It took the Fuggers another 40 years until 1647 to finally cut their last business ties with Spain, closing a painful chapter that had started with so much promise. The end of the Fugger commercial empire came not with a bang, but with a quiet, symbolic transaction. In 1657, Leopold Fugger formally returned the family's last great commercial assets, the mining rights in Tyrol, to the Habsburgs. These were the very mines that had launched Jacob the Rich's meteoric rise over 150 years earlier. Their return marked the definitive end of the Fugger Company. A year later, in 1658, the firm was officially dissolved. The grand enterprise that had crowned emperors and dominated a continent's economy was gone. The family survived, but as regional nobles and landowners, their era of global power was over. They had succeeded in becoming aristocrats, but only after the financial empire that made it possible had crumbled into dust. The story of the Fugger family is a sweeping epic of genius, ambition, and collapse. From the loom of a weaver in Augsburg, they climbed to a height of financial power that has arguably never been matched. Jacob Fugger the Rich was a true visionary who pioneered techniques in banking, intelligence, and multinational business that were centuries ahead of their time. He understood that wealth was power, and he used it to shape the destiny of a continent. Yet their decline is just as fascinating as their rise. The Fugger saga is a classic cautionary tale about the dangers of tying your fate too closely to politics. They built their empire by lending to kings, and they were ruined when those kings couldn't or wouldn't pay them back. The Spanish bankruptcies weren't just a financial problem. They were an existential crisis from which the firm never recovered. Their fall was also a story of human failure. The relentless drive of one generation gave way to the cautious conservatism of the next. The heirs of the empire chose to retreat into the comfortable safety of aristocracy rather than navigate the dangerous world of finance they had inherited. In the end, the Fuggers did achieve one of their goals. The family didn't vanish. Their descendants are still around today, living in the castles their ancestors bought with the profits from silver mines and royal loans. They are a testament to the endurance of aristocratic wealth. But the engine that created that wealth, the dynamic, world-changing company, is long gone. Dissolved in 1658, it's a powerful reminder that even the greatest financial empires can fall, and that the only thing more dramatic than a rise to absolute power is the fall that comes after. If you enjoyed this look into one of history's greatest financial powers, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more stories of wealth, power, and the lessons they teach us. Let us know in the comments which historical dynasty you'd like us to cover next.